Olaya, and I'm a friend of Morayo Akabasharu. Morayo Brownie Akabasharu. Pardon me. And I'm one of our oldest friends, and it's a privilege to be here to read her book and just give you my 2 cents about it. So let me quickly delve into it. So I'll be reading from chapter 1. A foundation remains forever. On the 6th day of July 1980, a pretty baby girl was delivered safely at the famous St. Nicholas Hospital on Lagos Island. I would love to assume that my parents felt joy and relief in the work that day as congratulatory messages flowed in. The story surrounding my birth is quite an interesting one. I was born 12 years after my immediate elder brother, Shegun. Friends have often questioned me about the age gap. Was it because there was a longing for a girl? They wondered why I was born after it seemed like my parents had stopped having children. They already had 3 healthy boys. There was no fairy tale surrounding my arrival. And out of sheer respect and love for my father and the family, my mother waited until I was mature before telling me the story of my birth. She and my father had not had close marital relations for a while. So on that historic night of my conception, she was not totally involved in the process. A log of wood could have given more attention. A few weeks after that night, the silence that held the truth of what had happened gave way. My mother was pregnant, and I was the result. My father never wanted that pregnancy because his new wife was not supposed to think or feel he was still having sexual relations with his first wife, my mother. What truly happened was that our golden uncle, Dr. Tunde Goodluck, had just returned from Russia and had a brand new car. He got into an accident that restricted his movement. He was then encouraged to live with my father in Ilesomi in Surulere because our house then was a bungalow. Being the brilliant doctor who had just arrived from overseas, my father evacuated his bedroom for him to recuperate. My dad then moved into my mother's room, though their relationship had become strained. One could say the proximity to my mom was a factor. This development was tough for my parents to accept. Although my mother nursed the desire to have a girl, she did not want to have another child under the wings of her then circumstances. Her relationship with my father had become frosty. Over a decade had passed since her last child. My father was furious on hearing the news and wanted nothing to do with the child. He would have taken that night back if that was an option. But actions have consequences, and I was a consequence of a depressed and emotionally detached mother and a polygamist father. I was born on my mother's birthday, her treasure, her birthday gift, and the greatest compensation God could give a woman with marital difficulties. My father's anger was unabated at my birth, so he refused to attend my naming ceremony. His elder sister, the late Mrs. Adebiyi, popularly called Mommy Okigbo, the late Pat Thompson, Auntie Banke Adebiyi Arokodari, and my brothers, Dibo, Lai, and Shegun Akabasharu, were there. I'm unsure of who else was there, but I recognized those 3 people from the photos. The saying that blood is thicker than water is profound. I was about 3 years old when my father first set his eyes on me, and he loved me from the moment. I got lots of love from my father for a child who was initially unwanted. My mother, Mrs. Kudirat Atinuke Akabasharu, Nee Fuja, owned several offices and shops at Akombo, one of Lagos Island's most commercially thriving spaces. Her father, the late Alhaji Teslim Abiodun Fuja, was the Ààrẹ of Lagos, a successful businessman, famous for his damask fashion. My mother inherited her business acumen from him. My mother cared for me greatly, and as a successful businesswoman, she spoiled me silly. She taught me to be humble and considerate towards others, irrespective of who they were. She ensured I had everything I needed and lived a privileged life, while instilling invaluable values and morals in me. My father was a successful lawyer and tireless worker who was present in the lives of my brothers and me, taking full responsibility for our education and welfare. For him, the clear lines between home and work. Most days, he worked till 5 p.m., driving to Yoruba Tennis Club and Atonikon before going home. As a prominent activist, he was always in the news. State security service were always on him during the military regime. News of his arrest or rumors of them searching for him became normal. Admittedly, there were scarier situations where my half-siblings were being stopped in school. As a child of a committed activist, I became politically aware at an early age. Everyone in the house knew of his dislike of General Babangida and the military. My father was a political force. His political views were highly regarded and respected. I still recall the period the iconic MK Abiola was to run for president. Our house became the meeting point for interested parties to discuss the implications of this move. Amongst other religious and cultural values, our home stood on the foundations of intellectual superiority and scholarliness. A standard that my father set so high, he read the dailies religiously and ensured he initiated me into this ritual. Naturally, I fell in love with reading non-fiction books and novels under his influence. I read authors like Tom Clancy, John Grisham, and he would question me about them afterwards. Those experiences certainly had a strong impact on who I became. As a toddler, I lived in a suburb area of Lagos State called Ilesomi before we moved to Bagada when I was about 4 years old. I attended Yani Rural Nursery and Primary School but switched to Corona Primary School, Bagada. Growing up without my brothers, Dipo, Olayi, and Shegun, was depressing. I could have given anything to be with them. They left the country when I was 3 years old, and this left me with a feeling of abandonment. I felt like an only child living in a big house, hoping for someone to rescue me from the shackles of loneliness. My greatest desire was to see my brothers, but whenever I was asked my father to see them, he never treated me with the urgency I wanted. For him, I had to be closer to my roots. He wanted all of my brothers back, home too. Attending the elite Corona Primary School meant I had well-traveled friends who visited cities like New York or London for summer holidays. My father did not care much about that. He insisted that we travel either within Nigeria or Africa. With me, he was not planning to make the same mistake he made with my brothers. He always grumbled about the brothers' reluctance to come back home. I also wondered, why did they not come home? Then in 1987, I think, one of my elder brothers, Shegun, came home, and I learned to be careful about what I wished for. I cannot recall the purpose of his visit, but I was super excited about it. Ultimately, the only memorable thing about this trip was the unforgettable beating he dished out to Dotto, my cousin, and me. That day, we begged God to take him back to London with the option of a return. My father was a disciplinarian, but many said he had grown soft by the time I was born. I heard frightening stories of how he dealt with my older siblings, especially brother Shegun. Considering all that I had heard, I would say I was lucky because I only got about 3 spanking lessons from him, and this was by far a slap in the wrist compared to my numerous transgressions. However, the beating that left a lasting impression on me happened just after his return from Ajashe, a town in the Republic of Benin, my father's second wife's hometown. As a custom, he returned with some local Ajashe biscuits, which I liked, and this trip was not an exception. So that morning, with my father still fatigued from his trip, I asked him if I could have some biscuits. With the assumption that my taste buds yearned for the local Ajashe biscuits only, he granted my wish. Unknown to me, I also had eyes for 2 boxes of McVitie's TUC crackers and shortbread biscuits he came with. This package was for a friend who had pleaded with my father to help him get them. To my credit, I did not eat the biscuits alone. I hosted a feast in that compound that day. The drivers, stewards, even our neighbors also tasted my generosity. I still remember the aftermath of my transgression. It was my father's row that woke me up the next morning. The way he screamed my name washed any trace of sleep off my face. The disgust his face wore when I told him how disposed of the biscuits was something I'd never seen before. Morayo, are you trying to tell me that you took the entire pot and shared it? He was visibly upset, but was calm enough to explain the implications of what I had done. Afterwards, he gave me a special kind of whooping that defied explanation in English. My mother lived in Bagada while David lived in Isolo. During the week, I stayed in Bagada with my parents. My father would go to Isolo to stay with Dada, my siblings, Folake and Tune. I always wanted to go with him, but my mother preferred I stayed with her. Try as he did to ensure the entire system worked efficiently, there were awful lapses. Simply put, he did what he could based on his understanding. There's also the truth that you can only do as much when human emotions are involved. As a child, one of the most painful memories was that anytime my father returned from a trip, he was likely to stop first in Isolo because that house was closest to the airport. What's that meant to a child? What was that meant to a child is that your siblings got to work to pick first from the goodies our father brought home. I hardly shared with anyone, but my heart bled each time my father came home with the leftovers. Sorry, I'm just going to skip to go. My time at Corona Primary School ended abruptly. I enrolled for the common entrance in Primary 5 a year earlier than scheduled. My parents said I was getting too tall and needed to leave at Primary 5. Although I passed the common entrance exam to Atlantic Hall, a close friend of my mother suggested I attend Maryland Comprehensive instead, which my parents obliged. My time at Maryland Comprehensive School had barely begun before it ended. One day, Mrs. Shashegbo, a close family friend, visited him, and knowing I attended Corona Primary School, was baffled that my parents did not enroll me in their secondary school. Okay, all right. I think I have to stop now so I can allow the other guests. But it's actually a very interesting read. You all should get a copy. Thank you.
Excellent evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a very big thank you for coming out to support my boss, my leader, my colleague, my friend Morayo today. I am Dr. B.C. Ugbo, and I'll be taking chapter 2. I'll just do a few pages because of time. Omo Jaye Jaye, Omo Jesu. My mother belonged to the cream de la cream of society. She was popular and influential, especially in the 80s and 90s. She was a role model to young business people and was known as a fashion icon and influencer. She partied with the Lagos elites, attending some of the biggest parties in town. Although my mother's love for me was unquestionable, we did not always have a close relationship, especially in my formative years. She was always busy and away from home. She tried to make up with phone calls, regularly checking up on me, but these could not compensate for her absence. I guess that is the price one pays for having a very successful business. At the same time, I spent much time with the Adeshokons, our neighbor-turned family. Unlike our large and polygamous home, the Adeshokons were a closely knitted family I admired. Spending time with them showed me an alternative family lifestyle. They were good Christians who attended church every Sunday and prayed together in the mornings and at night. You could sense their togetherness once you stepped foot into their home. I often used to daydream about being in a family like theirs, and I knew that when I grow up, I would not settle for anything less. Mrs. Adeshokon treated me like her daughter. Everyone knew she was my adopted mother. When my mother was busy working, she stepped in to bridge the gap. I loved how she always made time for her family. She attended my open days at school, watched me participate in school plays, and monitored my academic performance. The disbelief people expressed on learning that Mrs. Adeshokon was not my mother was proof of how close our families were. Since the Adeshokon brothers and I attended Corona Primary School, we carpooled in the mornings and spent some time together in the evenings after school. They were my escape from loneliness, and I loved them so much. My social life was entwined with theirs. They took me with their children swimming at the Koi Club and to visit other fun places. I felt loved, accepted, and secure with them. Just as it was with any good parent. "What is all this on your head?" Mrs. Adeshokon yelled. The question was unsettling, and before I could gather my thoughts and speech, her scissors were already dancing on my head. In no time, I was back to my recognizable self. I was so upset and stormed out of her house angrily. I would not have admitted this that day, but I am grateful to have had the amazing Mrs. Adeshokon as a guardian. These sort of experiences ensured I evaluated the practicality of my choices. Her reaction made me realize that I was still a child and had no business wearing adult hairstyles. So I want to go quickly to, I'm jumping some now so that I can take to the end. There's a part that was very interesting about Christianity. One of the most courageous, page 23, yes. One of the most courageous decisions I ever made was converting to Christianity. Coming from a core Islamic home, I knew the impact of this bombshell, but I had to let someone know. "Mommy, I gave my life to Christ." There was a long pause. It was as though my mother had suddenly lost her tongue. When she finally spoke, her response was diplomatic. "It's okay, Morayo, but do not tell your father. You know how he feels about this." I felt some relief hearing this from my mother, but little did I know that that was the beginning of a long battle. Growing up as a Muslim was quite fascinating. My mother was devoted and prayed 5 times daily. Her animal skin praying mat was always next to the bed. She started every day with the 5 a.m. prayer. Some mornings, I woke up to her sitting on the mat as she recited her prayers in Arabic. As devoted as she was, she never took the time to teach me the tenets of Islam. Even though I took Islamic lessons as a child, it ultimately counted for nothing as it was not reinforced at home. I knew my entire family was Muslim, but no one made me see the value of it. On the other hand, my father was not the kind of man you went to for spiritual guardians. I never saw him observe his prayers. For him, Islam was nothing but a label. So, I'm going straight to when she told her father. When I broke the news to my mother, page 25, even when I did not expect her to accept my decision with a smile, I knew she was going to be calm about it. On the other side, though she had warned against it contrary to her better judgment, I decided to tell my father. I was not one to hide things from the people I loved, and it did not seem like a big deal to me at the time. It was a simple switch from a religion and I never connected with to another that spoke to my soul. There are no prizes for guessing. My father was infuriated by the decision and my guts. "Is that what we sent you to school for?" he asked. With my head bowed, I stood before him in silence. From then on, it became an uphill battle of religion between us. Something dramatic happened on one of those weekends I spent with my father at my stepmother's residence. When it was time to leave that Sunday evening, I was nowhere to be found. No one knew I was at a church near my stepmother's house. It was their irresistible praise and worship session that lured me in. When he discovered where I was, losing all sense of decorum, my father barged into the church in the middle of an ongoing service, grabbed me firmly on the wrist and started screaming, "You are lying to my daughter! You are a liar! Jesus has been coming for many years and he still has not come! You are lying!" The service ended abruptly. I knew my father could be fiery, but I did not realize he could become this unhinged. Shocked and dazed, I freed myself from his hold and ran towards the door to flee the embarrassment. On the journey back home, he did not fail to express his disappointment in me. My father was completely against Christianity and did not hide his displeasure. I think I'll leave it here. So get the book and read it. It's an interesting read. Thank you.
I believe both reads deserve an amazing round of applause, please. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for sitting patiently through the read and enjoying it. I could see a lot of interesting expressions on everyone's faces, as it was probably a little alarming that Morayo went as deep as she did into her history, telling literally a tell-all of how it happened. But I actually am not surprised, because I've had the honor, had the pleasure of being able to work with her, under her, and I've always seen her to be very open. So reading about how she started, I'm beginning to understand the amazing village that raised this amazing woman. I'm beginning to understand how amazing her education was from different cultures, backgrounds, different religions, and how expressive she is on TV. Wow, you need to spend some time with Mo to understand how expressive she really is. I would like to ask once again for another round of applause. These first 2 chapters are just a window into what else you can find in this amazing piece. The Queen of Talk herself has put together a book for you to just have a sneak peek. But it does feel like there's another book coming, am I right? I feel like there's another book coming. Congratulations, Morayo, Afolabi Brown, on this amazing masterpiece. If anyone leaves here without a copy, they'll probably be calling you later on to get one when they hear. Exactly. I don't want to use those jokes right now, but you get what I mean. It does seem like the kind of book you would purchase for especially your daughters in your communities, other young ladies who want to go into media, so that they can also have someone to look up to, because I don't feel there are enough women in media that have put themselves out there like this, to this extent, and have become this successful. There are not enough of them. There is loads of room for many more amazing media women to grow, and this is a first step. Once again, please, a round of applause. Please, I think we should give her a standing ovation, actually. I think we should ask everyone to stand up and give her a round of applause. Morayo Afolabi Brown, everyone.